You're not going to buy or sell. They're going to threaten your financials. And you're going to say, well, how could that happen? Well, we saw that happen just a few years ago. During the pandemic, if you believed something that wasn't mainstream, guess what the government did? Freeze your bank account. You voted and supported for who? Freeze your bank account. You claim to be a Christian and you're against a jab? Freeze your bank account. It was happening in the United States. It was happening in Canada. It was happening in Australia. People's bank accounts were being frozen. Well, how am I supposed to eat and buy now? No man will be able to buy or sell unless you receive the mark. It happened to a lesser degree 5 years ago. And we say, no, it ain't going to happen under penalty of death. It was happening 5 years ago. People were dragged by the police. There was spy police. No man, when I went into Subway, I would go into Subway, and I was not allowed to purchase food unless I had a mask on. And then the odd part is that if I purchase food and they ask me for here or to go, I say for here, and I go and sit down. It's like if the Subway police say, okay, you're clean, you can eat without your mask on. I say, what in the world, what difference does that make? I come in, mask, or you stay out. Okay, but everybody else here eating don't have a mask on. You cannot buy or sell unless you have a mask. You can't go into Walmart unless you have a mask. Can't get into the mall unless you have a mask. And then, well, now, afterwards, first it was the mask. Then it was, you ain't buying or selling, you ain't walking into the grocery store unless you have proof that you were vaccinated. Then it went to the next step. Show me proof. You don't have it, you can't come in the store. And in Europe, there were some places where the unvaccinated will have to wait until everybody else purchased food, and then they'll let them come, and whatever's left, that's yours. And if there's no food left, that's bad luck for you. Go get yourself vaccinated. You think, wait a minute, this is insanity. We live in America where it's freedom of choice. If you choose to get vaccinated, that's you. You can't force that upon anybody else if they don't want to. But this is how the way things were being run. Why? Because the pandemic was a test. It was a test. It was a playground. Because the rules were contradictory of each other. If you look at the rules, they contradicted themselves. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about that in Signs of the Times and Final Events. But this was a testing ground to see how the people would receive it. Why? Because it was the devil's laboratory to see how is he going to eventually lead us to this point. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. God's commandments shows us what sin is, so we could know how to avoid it and to live godly in Christ and to go to Christ to be saved. But the devil tries to keep us in bondage of sin, in the chains of wickedness, so we could be lost, because the devil knows he's lost, so he's trying to get as much people as he can. Satan wants to make people worship him. He believes that he is the God of this world. He used to lead the heathen in biblical times to try to seduce God's people, so God's people could worship him. And many times, God's people, Israel, fell for it. And the devil is trying to do that very same thing now, even with the religious system in the earth. But I believe, you know why it hasn't gotten here yet? Even after everything that has passed? Because God still has his Josephs. God still has his Daniels. Joseph was in the government of Egypt, pagan, wicked nation, but God blessed it because Joseph was there. Babylon was a pagan, wicked nation, but God blessed it because Daniel was there. Even though there was politicians in Babylon that tried to bring evil, guess what? They couldn't because Daniel was there. They couldn't even throw him into the lion's den. That didn't even work. But God was there, and God blessed the nation because of Daniel. And what I believe is that we have Daniels and we have Josephs in government today. We might not know who they are. They might operate secretly, but I believe that they are sent by God to hold some of the winds of evil that the devil is trying to take place. Because if the devil had his way, he finished it all up 5 years ago with the pandemic. if the devil had his way. But you know what God says? God says, no, I'm not going to let that happen. Why? Because my people still need to share the gospel to the world. The glorious gospel of Christ. And at a time when the people were trying to go to the churches to see what was going on, what did the devil do? We're going to hide the gospel, and we're going to have the government tell the churches to close. The devil tried to hide the gospel. But guess what? People go online in the internet and hear the gospel that way. God always has ways to shed light to people. And Jesus says in Luke 21 and verse 9, Jesus says, but when ye shall hear of wars and commotions, be not terrified. And Luke is going to say wars and rumors of wars. Here, in Matthew is going to say wars and rumors of wars. Here in Luke, Jesus says wars and commotions. So that stood out to me. So I looked up the word commotion in the original Greek language, and it means instability, disorder, commotion, confusion, tumult. Economies, Jesus says, economies will be unstable. Families will be in disorder. And guess what? When families are disorder, the church is made out of families. When families are disorder, guess what's also going to be in disorder? The church. And we read this morning where Paul says that in the end times, the condition of God's people are going to be in the church, sadly. Why? Because there's going to be a lot of commotions going on in the world. And guess what? If the people are having disorder, then what does that mean for a country? And what does that mean for the world? It's going to be in turmoil. It's going to be in chaos because of wars in countries will be the result of tumult and confusion. And confusion of what? I highlighted that word confusion because that word commotion means turmoil, instability. Economies are going to be unstable and all this stuff is going to happen. But then it also means confusion. There's going to be confusion in the end times, Jesus is saying. What does Babylon mean? Babylon means confusion. And this is in the end times. What does Revelation say? As we near the end times, Babylon is going to try to get stronger and stronger to deceive the whole world by making people drink of the wine of Babylon, and it's going to cause confusion to go around, and it's going to all to be the end result of persecuting God's people. So confusion is going to be highly in the end times. But guess what? We also have confusion. And today, we got a confusion on gender. Every single type of confusion is going to happen, Jesus says. Why? Because Babylon, the devil, is going to be at work. Devil's trying to be as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Babylon is working hard to confuse the minds of not just the adults, but also the little kids. We have kids, teens, adults who think they are the opposite gender. A boy can now think he's a girl can now think they're a boy, and some people think, this is ridiculous, some people get interviewed and you ask them, what do you identify as? And they think they're a nothing. I'm a nothing. I'm whatever I want to be. I could be a boy today, a girl tomorrow. I can be a dog the next day. I could be whatever I want to be. I could be a plant if I want to. This is the state of mind, sadly, that are in some people in the world. It's confusion. And Jesus is saying there's not just going to be wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be wars, there's going to be commotions, there's going to be instability, there's going to be turmoil, there's going to be chaos, and there's also going to be confusion. And we can see that more today than ever before. How about this? What about during the lockdowns in COVID? I can't, somebody explain that one. Like if a tent is going to stop a virus from entering in and out. And that's the only way that this venue could stay open. If you don't do this, you can't open. So we put tents up, and we unzip, and we go in, and we dine, but guess what? Air can still go in and out. And if air can go in and out, guess what could also go in and out? The rules were confusing. They were contradictory of each other. I couldn't go inside a restaurant without wearing a mask, but if I'm going to dine in, I could take off my mask. Everybody else's mask is taken off. They're dining in, so I guess whatever priest that restaurant has, they pronounce me clean, and I'm good now. Doesn't make much sense. The rules were contradicting each other. Why could the church, the government immediately shut down the church? But guess what? Bars could stay open. The nightclub could stay open. But no, we want to shut down the church. Why? Because it wasn't about rules. It was the devil's attack on people. It was the devil's attack on God's church. Like I said in a previous presentation, if the devil had his way, he'd finish it all up and shut it down and persecute, which was what some people were doing. But God said, no, not yet. You could do this much, but no further. And it was just enough that God's people should have awakened and said, this is what's going to happen today. Imagine what's going to happen at the end time. The rules were contradictory to each other. How about this? Church members fined for attending drive-in service despite following COVID-19 guidelines. Even if you are following the rules from the CDC, and what this church did was, the preacher made a platform outside, so you're outside, you're not in a confined space, and he set up a platform with an amplifier, and the people will come in and drive up in the parking lot and roll the windows up and turn on the AC, and they will hear the preacher in their cars. So no one's having contact with nobody else. They're not even outside. They're in their cars, and the preacher's just preaching through the amplifier, and they're having church that way. CDC says it's okay. Well, the cops were there within minutes and said, no, what you're doing is illegal, and they fined each and every car $500. But wait a minute, we're following CDC guidelines. This is what the so-called scientists and the experts tell us to do, and they say it's okay. No, it's all about control. It was all about keeping the gospel shut and hid, and hide the glorious gospel of Christ. And you know what was happening during the pandemic? I realized you know what was one of the number one things that was being Googled? Was Matthew 24. People wanted to know what was going on, what's happening, and they were looking for the Bible for answers, and the first thing they wanted to do was go to the church, but the first thing that was closed was the church. The devil knew the people are going to be agitated, and they're going to look to the Word of God for answers, but then the light source of the world, that should be the candlestick, is shut down. So now people are looking for answers elsewhere. Somebody explain this one to me. So in the airport, you have to be 6 feet apart, as if a virus can't travel more than 6 feet. But then, when you're in the airplane, you could be all cramped up together like this. I don't get this logic. But somehow, the churches must remain closed. How about if we open up the churches and, everybody could sit 12 feet apart? No. Churches have to stay closed. But when you're in the airport, they mark the floors. When I was in the airport, they marked the floors. You have to be here, 6 feet away, the next person there. And how dare you move an extra foot? But guess what? Once we're in the plane, we can all be together like this. But the churches have to stay shut. And then we had something else going on in 2020 and 2021 during the pandemic. We had riots. We had looting, we had burning of cities. Nobody raised a hand against them. In riots in America, BLM, Antifa, during 2020 and 2021, despite COVID lockdowns in place, many were allowed to riot, destroy, loot, and cause turmoil, disorder, and confusion. And 90% of these people don't even have a mask on. And they're in cities that enforce strictly these COVID rules. If you did not, the news makes a big deal now on how the police is trying to look for an illegal immigrant. But they said nothing, the news said nothing about when the police force will go into neighborhoods and start shooting citizens, American citizens, with rubber bullets, forcing them to abide by a curfew to go indoors by a certain time. That was never shown. Why? Because it doesn't go according to the narrative and it's causing confusion. It's contradictory. And here we have riots and looting. Oh no, but this doesn't spread COVID. I don't spread COVID. That's okay. I don't spread nothing. But if we gather in a church to worship the Lord, oh, you're a big target for COVID. You're a big spreader of COVID. And many were protesting for an organization called Black Lives Matter, while this same riot protesting for Black Lives Matter, and what were they doing? They were destroying businesses, many times including black-owned businesses. This is how you know that whatever was going on here, it wasn't really for Black Lives Matter. It was for something else. Many cities were turned in chaos, and not a hand was raised against them. This is Washington, D.C., in fire, right next to the Capitol building. While the news would show you every single day for the next 3-4 years what happened in January 6, 2021, news said nothing about what was going on here, right in the Capitol building. Fires all over the place. And if the news did show it, it was for about 10, 15 seconds, and they said, oh, this is a mostly peaceful protest. There's nothing to see here. But this was going on while there was COVID. No, but this don't spread COVID. The rules are contradictory. Jesus says that in the end times, there was going to be confusion, there was going to be commotion, there was going to be turmoil, there was going to be instability, and we saw it 4 years ago, and there's more instability now than there was 4 years ago. I thought maybe this was going to be the worst of it, but it's not. And guess what? Who do you think was funding most of these violent protests? Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. Rome was funding these violent protests. Rome was funding this turmoil. Rome was funding this confusion, this chaos, this disorder. How do I know? You ask how? Let's go look at this. This is a Catholic website called LifeSite Catholic. They are a news outlet for the Catholic Church, and they came out with an article, and it was, this one is in, this is X or Twitter, and it was in other places, posted in other places. It says, U.S. bishops caught funding radical groups supporting riots, calling for death to the police. And what they did was they published this article. This is a Catholic website. This is a Catholic news outlet, and they are reporting that their own bishops, on the one hand, were against all the commotions, all these violent protesting. They were all against it, but secretly behind the scenes, they were funding it. And they were working both ends to the middle. And they showed, because the Catholic Church is also supposed to be a charitable organization, and they showed the paperwork, I think it was the IRS documents or tax documents or whatever, on how much money they gave to certain organizations, certain charitable organizations. And in the list included were a whole bunch of organizations that were involved in the protests and the violent protests and the riots. And they offered evidence. You can look this up if you want. When Jesus says there was going to be commotions before his return, there was going to be disorder, turmoil, confusion of every kind, it's going to come from Babylon, the mother of harlots, who will be very active during the end times, working to eventually persecute God's people. Today, they hire anarchists to go protest against the president, and tomorrow they hire the same anarchists to go against God's people who keep the commandments of God and have the faith and testimony of Jesus Christ. That's what many people don't see. They think they're protesting against something, against some president or some issue now, and some things that they might be protesting, some people could say might be good, but they don't understand where it's going to lead to in the long run. They're going to protest against something violently today, and tomorrow they're going to protest against you if you stay firm to the Word of God. What happened to Elijah? Elijah was blamed for the famine. They said, it's your fault. You worship God. And Elijah's like, not my fault. It's your fault for leaving God. So now the result is you have a famine. God is prohibiting the rain. If you think Baal is so powerful, go pray to him. And we know how that turned out. But Elijah got blamed for all of Israel's mishaps. Just like in the end times, God's people are going to be blamed for all the chaos and disorder that's going to happen because the people have left God and they have served the Antichrist, which is controlled by the devil, and the devil wants nothing but to destroy. He doesn't want to save. He wants to condemn. Jesus says famine is going to increase, and it's going to be more widespread, causing shortages and causing economies to go into commotion, to go and become unstable. And then Jesus says that we're going to have pestilences. The word pestilence means disease, plagues. pandemics. Jesus says pandemics are going to be more and more frequent as the end times come. This is going to be destruction by disease at a rate, at a scale that we've never seen. When this type of destruction happens, the sad reality is there's no cure for this, because this type of destruction that Jesus is predicting is caused by the devil. And the devil is going to try to get with him and bring down as many as he can. There's not going to be vaccinations for this type of stuff. You know, what's interesting is that the Spanish flu back in 1918 killed 50 million people, and it had a 20% mortality rate. And COVID was responsible for, they say, 7 million deaths and only had a 1% mortality rate, and the world went crazy. In a town in South Africa, I'm sorry, not South Africa, South America, there was a town in South America where, I can't remember if it was Venezuela or Colombia, but they were blaming Christians for COVID. They're saying it's your fault that this is happening. Just like they're going to blame, just like they blamed Elijah for the bad things that was happening, they're going to blame God's people for all this stuff. Why? Because Babylon is going to say it's their fault for refusing the mark of the beast. It's their fault for not accepting the counterfeit Sabbath. And as long as they're continuing to do what they do and they're alive, guess what? We're always going to have this. That's what Israel did. Why is the famine still persisting? It persists because Elijah is still alive. And Ahab is saying, I've checked all throughout all the other countries, and they all have signed testimonies. These kings from their countries search for Elijah, and they say, hey, he's not here. They were all looking and hunting down for Elijah because he, according to them, was the cause of their famine. Come with me to Mark chapter 13, and we'll look at something interesting here. Mark chapter 13. Mark chapter 13, verse 8 through 10. Jesus says, "For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be earthquakes in diverse places, and there shall be famines and troubles, and these are the beginning of sorrows." He says, "But take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to the councils and in the synagogues, and ye shall be beaten, and ye shall be brought before the rulers and kings for my name's sake, for a testimony against them. And the gospel must first be published amongst all nations." Jesus is saying, in the midst of these plagues, in the midst of these pestilences, in the midst of these pandemics, you're going to be taken to the Supreme Court. You're going to be taken to the White House. You're going to be taken before kings and princes and the governor's mansion, and you're going to be dragged into the synagogues. You're going to be taken into the churches. They're going to beat you up. But guess what? Jesus is saying, I'm letting it happen for a reason. You're going to be taken before the Senate. You're going to be taken before the House. You're going to be taken before Congress. Jesus is saying, I'm letting it happen for a reason, even in the midst of all the pestilences that's happening. Why? Jesus says, because there is still people in the White House. There's still people in the Congress. There's still people in the Supreme Court. There's still people in the churches. There's still people in the governor's mansion that when they drag you, Jesus says, this is your time to share the gospel. And there's going to be people in there that's going to accept it and be saved. And all this is going to happen. Jesus says the gospel must be preached at the same time when we're going to see these pestilences and these pandemics coming. But guess what? If we were scared during COVID and we shut down all the churches and nobody wanted to do anything, no outreach, no nothing, guess what? I told my friends, if this is how the way we're acting now, how more so are we going to act when this thing really hits? And this is when Jesus says the gospel is going to be taken to the world. No one wants to be at church. Everybody's afraid of COVID. You know, if you go to Numbers 25, you read about a plague that was happening in the camp of Israel. And you think people stayed in their tents because of the plague? Bible says they all went to the sanctuary. And they went to the sanctuary, and Moses said, there's a plague, there's a pestilence, there's a pandemic, there's an epidemic that started. And he told Aaron, go fill up a censer, and you stand in the middle, holding the gap. And the people that were in the sanctuary were saved. I said, even more so, when there's an epidemic going on, we got to be in the church. We got to be preaching the gospel. We got to be taking the truth of God to each and every corner of the earth. For every witness to all nations, and then shall the end come. Jesus says it's when the troubles happen that the gospel is going to be taking place and it's going to be preached. But we failed miserably 4 or 5 years ago. Because 4 or 5 years ago, we had a small taste of an epidemic, and we were all scared to our wits' end, and we shut down. Almost 95% of the churches closed, and while the world was looking for the gospel and looking at Matthew 24 and other prophetic chapters in the Bible and looking for a place of truth, they were looking for standard bearers. Guess what? We turned our lights out. And what happened in the sanctuary when the candlesticks went out? The Spirit of God left. And the sanctuary went into corruption. You can read that in 1 Samuel during the time of Eli. Jesus says, when the armies surround Jerusalem, know that the desolation is nigh, the end is nigh, and flee to the mountains. When the armies surround the truth. I'm saying, okay, we might be getting somewhere. What do armies represent? Well, armies is controlled by government. Without government, the army doesn't have a commander-in-chief. Jesus is saying in the end times, when the government unites against the truth worldwide, know that the desolation is nigh and flee to the mountains. During COVID, doctors, nurses that were trying to share information of alternative treatment that was outside of mainstream news and mainstream pharmaceutical industries, they were all shut down. How about the topic of abortion? Abortion is taught in many schools as a good thing. There was a group of Christians who made a film. They listed it as an anti-abortion film. It was in reality a film showing a woman's experience during her abortion and her story. Well, that received an R rating. Kids are not allowed to watch that. But yet, schools could teach pro-abortion and could show kids sexually explicit material that is well beyond an R rating content, and it's okay, it's education. But the truth? No, the truth, you can't show that to little kids. We're starting to unite against the truth. If you say that there's only 2 genders, you're censored, you're canceled, and you could be in danger of being fired. They're uniting against the truth. You hear about other countries like in China. China has AI cameras everywhere, and they scan you, they know where you are, and it's all for mass censorship. You think that's just in China? No, it's going to be everywhere eventually. Jesus is saying when you see the whole world in unity with Babylon, Revelation 17 says that all the kings of the earth are going to be one with the beast. It hasn't happened yet, but it's beginning to come together. Jesus is saying when we see the whole world begin to unite with Babylon, the kings of the earth, in a global new world order to set up the mark of the beast and go against those who believe the truth of God in His Word, who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, when we see them unite against the truth, the armies of government uniting against God's spiritual people in Jerusalem, Jesus says, know that the end is nigh and flee to the mountains. We saw a small percentage of that happen during COVID. But it wasn't worldwide yet. There were still some countries who resisted this stuff. COVID was a playground. How many people are for? How many people are against? How can we control? How can we establish our end game? It wasn't the end yet. But Jesus is saying when we see more of this, know that the desolation is nigh. I believe that the armies of government began to surround Jerusalem, but then, because of the grace of God, they all retreated, and now we're living in the retreating time. This was spring training. If you know sports, you have spring training, you prepare, you have a short little mini season and exhibition games just to prepare for the season. COVID was an exhibition. Then we have a little peace and safety. And then the season begins, and the devil is going to be in full force. Jesus is saying when we see this, know that the desolation is nigh.